Hello, it's been a while. I feel like there's always some major life events that happen between me filming and it's a really strange pattern. Um, yeah, we don't have to go into details, but it's been a while since I recorded. It's actually been a while since I read what books I'm about to talk about today. So low-key, my memory's pretty fuzzy on it. I'm gonna try my best to be succinct and try and touch all the bases I need to. I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm already sick of my intro. It's a feat that I didn't think I'd accomplish so quickly. Maybe there's a speed running world record for that. I don't know. Yes, I'm filming during the day. Once again, I feel like shit changes in my background every time, which I think is pretty funny. Speaking of shit changing in my background, let's appreciate this adorable blanket. Oh, hang on. Let's appreciate this adorable blanket that my mom got for me for my birthday. It is a bunch of pictures of my baby boy, Louie. I cherish it very much. It lives on the back of my chair now. And we also have some Lego flowers in the background. There's a couple more there that you can't see, and I really don't feel like rotating you. But if you're curious, orchid, chrysanthemum, sunflowers, cherry blossoms, plum blossom, in that order, going that way. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns. It is a completed duology, which, love that. I don't like waiting for books to release, but just because I get very obsessed, and I kind of want to consume. I'm a binger, when it comes to watching shows and games and books, obviously. So gives you a little insight about me. The thing is, I don't know if I have the time to cover both books in this video, so I might have to break this up. So sorry if you see a bit of a change after this first part, but I know for sure we're going to be talking about One Dark Window right now. I will have it split up so that this is all one video. So, One Dark Window. Let's talk about it. Because it's been so long, and no spoilers yet, but One Dark Window is very different from Two Twisted Crowns. So I definitely like Two Twisted Crowns more than One Dark Window, which is interesting. I liked One Dark Window. I really liked the atmosphere, the world building, and just the setting, the vibe of it all. I could feel this world. I could smell it. I could hear it. It was so immersive, and I haven't felt that way about a world in so long, especially one that doesn't have a movie or a TV adaptation. So to be able to do that just through words is super impressive. I loved the magic system in this book. It was so interesting and so unique. Just really, really good stuff. So let's get some warnings out of the way. First of all, spoiler warning for Two Twisted Crowns and One Dark Window, aka the Shepherd King series. And then I'm also going to do a trigger warning for, oh good god, death, child death, let's see, bodily harm, attempted murder, assault. We don't touch on sexual assault, but it gets close. Just be wary. It's a relatively dark book. Also physical abuse towards children. Yeah, can't say it's the most lighthearted book series. Regardless, I still really enjoyed it. The first book follows exclusively, and I'm saying this for a reason, exclusively our main character, Elspeth Spindle. fuck, I've never said that out loud. I don't think that's a hard name to say. I went ahead and I actually, low-key, I put a lot of work into this so far. I made a bunch of graphics that will appear on screen as they are needed. And I also made family trees, 3 of them, because we're going to need all 3. Fun times. So, the book starts on Elspeth's birthday, and she is walking to her father's home. I believe she's walking with her cousin Ione. If not, she meets her there. Or no, she meets her in the town, like, square almost. Her cousin Ione Hawthorne is her name. Elspeth actually lives with her cousin Ione and lives with her aunt, her biological aunt, and then her married-in uncle, and their 3 kids. Ione Hawthorne. One second. Let me consult the text, the scriptures. Okay. Elspeth actually lives with her relatives, the Hawthorns, which is her mother's sister's family. So she lives with her biological aunt, her married-in uncle, and her 3 cousins. We're only really going to be focusing on Ione, and not even that much in this book. So just so you know, I'm going to go ahead and pop the graphic up on screen here. And by I mean my brother-in-law, who's like super awesome and talented. So we have Ione, Lyn, and Aldrich. They were born in that order. We go from oldest to youngest. You'll notice that with my family trees. Just take note. I try to do it oldest to youngest, like left to right. Is this inversed? You'll see what I mean. So they are walking together to Elspeth's father's house for her birthday. Every year they see each other on her birthday, and it's kind of awkward because she doesn't live with him. And he actually has remarried since his wife, Elspeth's mom, died years ago. It's not specified when, and it's not really specified how, but we know that it's a whole thing. Some things you should know about the town that we are set in. Its name is Blunder, and it is slowly being consumed by a mist that is dangerous. The dangerous thing about it is that the mist actually infects children. So if children play in the mist, let's say without a charm, I'll explain that in a second, they will become, it's the world's use of it, which I find super interesting, they'll become infected with magic. They'll grow a fever and their veins will turn black, and they will have some sort of unspecified magic that almost always comes, which it does. So not even almost always, it comes with a degeneration over time, which is the price of the magic. Having magic is illegal in this kingdom. It's sort of like a town and a kingdom. Like, it's not super big, I don't think. I digress. It's illegal to have magic. You're supposed to be sentenced to death if you hide it, and also if you have it, if you're a child, or if, let's say, your relatives hid it with you and knew, they will also be put to death because they were harboring someone who was infected with magic. Little thing about our main character, Elspeth, she's infected with magic. She got the fever when she was 9, I believe. Yes, 9. And at first, nothing really happened. Like, she was completely normal afterwards. When she did catch the fever, her father, Eric Spindle, again, on-screen family tree, sent her away to go live with her aunt because her mom had already died. Her mom's name was Iris. Call back to Ruthless Vows. So she went to go live with her aunt Opal, and, you know, only at the time, it was her elder cousin, Ione. She's 2 years older. Elspeth is 20 years old, important to note, as the book starts. It's her 20th birthday. As I said, Elspeth was relatively normal until something happened that kind of triggered her magic, let's say. She was out, I believe, in the woods, not in any danger, just, out at night when she saw her uncle come home with blood on his sword and some other people. And Elspeth followed him, and he put down a card into his study. And when Elspeth followed him, he had left, she touched the card. The card, it's our main safe magic system in Blunder. They're called Providence cards, and they are the only way to practice legal magic. Essentially, a Providence card is a card. If you tap it 3 times, you activate what it does, and it, you have that power. However, if you use it too long, its negative side effects will take into effect. In order to stop it, stop using the card, you tap it 3 times, or someone else touches it while you're using it, and that negates the effect, and the card is, can be controlled by them now if they wish. So, we're gonna go ahead and talk about the cards. I'm gonna have everything on screen as I talk about them. It's a long list. We start with the Black Horse. The Black Horse grants its user strength, and if used too long, it makes its user weak. There are 12 of these cards that were made. So we're gonna keep going down into the deck. So every card that I talk about, the number will go down by 1. Think of it like that Christmas song, like 5 golden rings, 4 turtle doves, 3 French, No, there's not 4 turtle doves. There's turtle doves, French hens, and fuckery. I don't remember the song. So, Black Horse, there's 12 of them. I have it up on screen right now as you listen to my luscious voice. Kidding. So, next up, we have the Golden Egg. It grants its user great wealth, but if used too long, it makes its user consumed by greed. After that, we have the Prophet. Grants its user glimpses into the future, and if used too long, makes its user unable to change the future. The White Eagle. Grants its user courage, and if used too long, makes its user fearful. The Maiden. Grants its user beauty and unblemishedness. If used too long, it makes its user cold-hearted. The Chalice. Turns liquid into truth serum, and if used too long or used improperly, as I will discuss later, it turns its truth serum into poison. The Well. Allows the user to see their enemies, and if used too long, the user will be betrayed by a friend. The Iron Gate. Grants its user blissful serenity, and if used too long, it steals years from the user's life. The Scythe. Grants the user the power to control others, and if used too long, inflicts great physical pain upon the user. The Mirror. Grants its user invisibility, and if used too long, it lifts the veil between the living and the dead. The Nightmare. This one's important. They're all important. The Nightmare. Allows its user to speak into the minds of others, and if used too long, reveals its user's deepest fears to themselves. And last, but definitely not least, the Twin Alders. Grants the user the power to communicate with the spirit of the wood. If used too long, its afflictions are unknown. We're gonna rewind to when I was storytelling. I'm kind of bad at this, so I'm not gonna lie. Elspeth reaches out to touch the Providence card. The card that she touches is the Nightmare, which, if you'll remember, it allows its user to speak into the minds of others. And if you were following along with counting, or you were looking at the graphics on screen, I had it in opposite corners. There's only 2 cards in existence, 2 nightmare cards in existence. When Elspeth touches it, she blacks out, and all of a sudden she comes to, and there's a voice in her head. It's an older man who's like really creepy, and he's literally in her mind. We don't know what this means yet, but his name, for now, is the Nightmare, after the card. We'll go ahead and resume to present book day. Elspeth is inside her father's home, and she's greeted by her stepmother, who's a bitch. Her name's Nerium. Reference the family tree. And her half-siblings, who are twins, Dimia and Naya, I think. I hope. Honestly, I don't really care. They kind of suck. Dimia and Naya are 7 years younger than Elspeth, making them 13. At some point, they are drinking wine in the book, but I guess that's normal. The vibe for this book is kind of giving like 1800s, I think. Yeah, sure. Let's go with 1800s, or maybe 1700s. I don't know. So it's all very like, oh, should you be drinking wine at that age? Well, they did it back then, apparently. So there you go. It's very gothic. This book is very gothic fantasy. It is definitely not, I wouldn't call it safe for kids. I'd probably say like 18 and up, honestly, but that's just me. So she's greeted very coldly by her stepmother, Nerium, and she even comments how she isn't sure why her father, Elspeth's father, keeps irises around the house because they're dreadful looking flowers or something like that. This angers Elspeth because it's her mother's namesake, and he keeps them around because he loved her. Another thing to note, actually, everyone's last names in this book are named after trees. We have the spindle tree, the hawthorn tree. We'll get to know a few more. Elspeth's mother's maiden name was Whitebeam, and in the courtyard of her father's home, there's a spindle tree next to a whitebeam tree that are like meant to be growing together, symbolic of his first wife and his marriage. It's a nice little omen when you forget that he kind of kicked his daughter out when she got a fever that she couldn't control. Okay. Actually get to hear the nightmare in Elspeth's mind say, "Your father's coming," and she says, how do you know? And he's like, "Close your eyes, can't you tell?" And there's this bright turquoise, I believe, light that emanates. So her father actually carries a well card. It was part of her mother's dowry, and so it's his now, and he carries it around. And the thing about it is that not Elspeth, but the Nightmare can see the colors of Providence cards. They have corresponding colors. I went ahead and made the graphics with the corresponding colors, so you kind of get a vibe for it. But yes, the Nightmare can see Providence cards, their colors, which is an incredibly powerful ability, seeing as they are very rare. They're hard to come by. They are worth a lot, and they're usually traded away or bartered in some way. So that's a super powerful ability. And since the Nightmare and this are pretty much her only magical afflictions, she's able to keep it on the DL, and no one knows that she has magic. They just think that she got the fever and she survived and she doesn't have magic and it's a miracle. That's not the case. Also, sorry if the lighting's weird. The sun is like right there. So he comes into the room, gives her a nice greeting, and like kind of sticks up to her, or for Elspeth, when Nerium says something snide. But it's enough to make Elspeth uncomfortable, and she leaves. She decides to walk through the forest home, take the forest road, which is dangerous because the woods. So when she's walking the forest road, she's apprehended by a couple of highwaymen. I'm gonna go ahead and put the fuck is it called? Definition that I made up on screen because I didn't know what this word was until reading this book. A group of people, sometimes on horseback, who rob travelers, as it relates to the book. There's a different specific definition when it comes to that, but as it relates to the book, that's what's important. Providence, the protective care of nature as a spiritual power, as it relates to the book. Again, different definition, but as it relates to the book, that's what's important. As Elspeth is apprehended by the highwaymen, she kind of panics, and she's being asked if her uncle, who she lives with, has any Providence cards worth any value, because highwaymen specifically steal Providence cards, and it is illegal to steal a Providence card. Where are you not? It's punishable by death. So she goes ahead and lies and says that she's just like some random like maid or something who works in the house, and she freaks out and she calls out into her mind and speaks to the nightmare and says, "Help me." Very important. The nightmare imbues her with his strength, and her veins turn black as his magic takes over and gives her incredible strength and speed. And so she knocks one of them to the ground and runs off, and she's eventually safe, but it's enough to shake her up. Highwaymen are dangerous. There is another entity around called destriers. Go ahead and put that on screen. Again, another word I didn't know. I thought it was just made up for the book, but apparently it's irrelevant at some point in book 2. Like, it's just in passing mentioned that it is a real word. So, destriers are a rare kind of warhorse from the Middle Ages. Apparently it's French. I can't really say the French name because I think I sound really fucking stupid, but I'll go ahead and say it for you now for your viewing pleasure. Fucking hell. Destriers. We're gonna move on. So, destriers are essentially like the King's Guard, but they specifically hunt out anyone who is infected with magic and hiding it. They also do like regular King's Guard shit, but that's one of their main purposes, is to suss out anyone who has magic and execute them, or take them to the dungeons and then execute them after a trial. Okay. We'll know how that goes. That really doesn't get touched on much and that in depth until book 2, but figured I'd mention it here. After Elspeth's pretty shaken up, next morning they find out that the Hawthorns have been invited to the king's palace, if you will, castle, which is called Stone, and it's held in celebration of equinox. So Elspeth doesn't want to go. First of all, royals ill, people ill, because she spent her life in hiding essentially because of her magic. She was terrified of destriers or people finding out because she could be killed. And also destriers will be around, and that's just dangerous and not good. Ione, her cousin, is super excited, and she's like, "Oh my god, we're going to equinox!" And then Opal, her aunt, is like, "Yeah, no, we're so behind on our taxes. Like, the mist is fucking up crops and harvesting." So the mist, because it is dangerous, it is even still dangerous to adults. If you're not in the mist, or if you're in the mist without a charm, you kind of go crazy and you eventually die. And we'll talk more about that later. So it's dangerous, mist is bad, and Elspeth even comments on how if it's not cured within her lifetime, the entire country essentially will be enveloped in it, which is not good. There is a little teensy tiny way that the mist can be cured, but we'll touch on that in a bit. So, her uncle, his name is Tyrn, he's like, I got a way to handle our taxes. Don't even worry about it. And then he goes to his office, and then he comes back to the dining table, and he just slaps down the nightmare card right on the table. Yeah, he's been hiding it from his family this entire time. And so everyone's equally as shocked, and one of the little boys, Elspeth's little cousins, goes to reach for it, and the other's like, you'll ruin it, you'll break it, you're gonna fuck it up, essentially. And Tyrn takes the card, and he's like, haven't you all read the Old Book of Alders? And he tries to like rip it in half, but it doesn't. So, what is the Book of Alders, or the Old Book of Alders? Fuck, I forget which one it is. Anyway, it is a book written by the first king of Blunder, known as the Shepherd King, hence the Shepherd King series. So, it details all about the Providence cards, what they do, the dangers of them, how he made them, because he did make them. And it's just like an extensive, like, almost history on it, but it's from the perspective of one man. And it's written in riddles also. So, pretty hard to decipher on its own. And a lot of the information in this book is weaponized, which I think is a very interesting choice. I think it has something, like, there's something to be said about the weaponization of texts in history if it's in the wrong person's hands or a group of people and it's used to control people or, you know, make people fearful. That's all I'm going to say on that. Make of that what you will. I don't know if the author did that intentionally. I'd like to think she did, but I'm not going to, you know, just assume. Oh, also, author, Rachel Gilling. Can't believe I didn't say that before. There you go. So, it's interesting, this book. It's referenced a lot, all of the time. They are going to Equinox. The other reason Elspeth wants to stay away is because a couple years ago, when she had gone, the last time she had gone to Stone, there was a boy there. The last time she had gone to Stone, there was a boy there named Alex Laburnum, I believe. And they kissed, and she just kind of kissed him to kiss him. It wasn't like anything like that, but he caught feelings hard, and she wants to avoid him. So we're gonna fast forward. They're going to Stone. They're doing the little march, walk, long walk with all of the other noble people. Yes, they're kind of noble also. Important to mention. Elspeth's father, Eric, is actually the ex-captain of the Destriers, which made him all the more intimidating because it was his job to essentially report his own daughter for getting infected. Scary. He chose to send her off, which plays into however you think that went and whatever you making that out to be. So, as they're walking, Ione kind of lets it slip that Tyrn kind of plans to use the Nightmare card as a bargaining chip with the king to also get Ione an introduction with one of the two princes. I'm going to go ahead and it's important now. The first prince, the one who will inherit the throne, his name is Hoth Rowan, and the younger prince, his name is Renelm Rowan, but he goes by Elm, just so you know. The king, his name was Quercus Rowan. I don't know, it's not mentioned too much, his first name. He's just like called King Rowan. Side tangent, I'm really fucking sick of the name Rowan. I'm so fucking sick of it. Little backstory, we had played, my friends and I, we're in a D&D campaign, and one of my friends, his character's name was Rowan. That's fine. Around the same time, I was reading a book series, which is behind me. If you want to spot it, that's up to you. It was a horrible book series. I hated it. And the main male love interest name was Rowan. He was fucking disgusting. I'm not gonna go into details. Fuck him though. Then we had Roman from Ruthless Vows and Divine Rivals, and that's close enough to Rowan to piss me off. Now we have this, and then I recently watched Mayfair Witches, which was a bad show, and the main character's name, who was super unlikable, her name was Rowan. Can we get another name, please? Like, it makes sense for this book, I get it, it's a tree, I guess, I didn't know that, but like, fuck, can we get another name, please? I'm dying. Okay, side tangent over. When Elspeth hears that Tyrn wants to use this as a bargaining chip and set up a meeting between Ione and one of the princes, Elspeth's like, no, stay away from them. They're brutes. They're trouble. They're gonna hurt you, especially like the eldest prince. Stay away from them. Ione doesn't like this, and she gets pretty upset with Elspeth, and it's just like, it's my life, it's my choice. I want to meet them. Suffice it to say, that conversation doesn't go too well. Shit, there was another thing I meant to mention. Fuck. I'm gonna do a little, forgot to mention this, I'm so sorry. So the mist. It grows every year, and it's been around for 500 years at this point, which is when the Shepherd King, the first king of Blunder, was alive 500 years ago. It was created in part due to his deal that he made with the Spirit of the Wood. I mentioned that when I was reading off the Twin Alders card, which is one of a kind. It's the only card in existence, and no one knows where it is. It is lost. So the king, the Shepherd King, in order to create these cards, he had to sacrifice something for each. Essentially, he was born with magic. He was born with the ability to speak to the trees and control them, also with his crook. And he wanted to be able to give magic to the people. It's something he believed everyone should have access to. So he created the cards. Each one cost him something. They all cost something different, and the prices were pretty horrific. So because of the mist, it kind of grew with every card that he made. Because of the mist, it was, infecting people with magic, which is what it is referred to in this book. It became dangerous, and he wanted to cure the mist, and he was told by the Spirit of the Wood, essentially, that the only way to cure the mist was to unite the deck of cards, so one of each of the cards, and bind it in the blood of someone who's infected on winter solstice, which is pretty dire. So the reason the king is so after what Tyrn is going to use as a bargaining chip, the Nightmare card, is because there's only two, and he doesn't have one yet to complete the deck. Every king's duty throughout these past 500 years, every Rowan king, because it's followed one line, the Rowans, has been to unite the deck and cure Blunder of the Mist. It's like their top priority. So Tyrn's been holding on to this card for 11 years, and now he's finally going to use it when he needs it the most. Sus and scummy, I know. So Equinox kind of kicks off with this feast, and in like the huff after her spat with Ione, Elspeth just kind of decides to sit somewhere kind of near her family, and she ends up sitting next to one of the cousins of the princes. Last name starts with she ends up sitting next to Emery Yu. I have the family tree on screen probably. We're gonna go ahead and break it down in a bit. So Emery, to note, I believe he's like 15 or 16 younger than Elspeth, which is noted that he's too young for her. throughout like a couple comments that some side characters make, like, oh, he's too young for you. Like, isn't he too young for you? Yes, she's 20, too young. So he starts to get a little weird and kind of drunk because I guess that's the setting. So she ends up kind of getting overwhelmed and she wants to go get some air, and he ends up following her and like being really pushy and really like insistent on like coming with her, and she's just like, no, no, no. And eventually at some point, like, his hand brushes hers and he just kind of like doesn't act like himself, and he talks about, essentially he kind of like outs her to have magic and outs the voice in her head, which sufficiently freaks her out. And all of a sudden this guy comes up and kind of like pushes him down the stairs. It's his older brother, Ravenhue. So he just wanted to, you know, get him off of her, and she ends up asking like, how did you know like to come here? And then he was like, my cousin told me. Cousin being Elm, Renelm. And he was actually sitting next to Emery, kind of like keeping an eye on him. Not clear how he was told, since Raven was not at this dinner, but Elspeth kind of lets it go. We go to sleep. Next day, there's promenading in the gardens. And Elspeth, because of the nightmare, is able to see a bunch of card colors. She ends up seeing like a bunch of maiden cards, and it grosses her out because, fuck, I forgot to mention it. Okay, it grosses her out because it turns out Ione was actually, gotta restart this. Oh my god. Okay. So the dinner. In like the haste of it all, and like thinking about, you know, she's distracted, Elspeth is distracted by the fight with Ione. She goes and she just like takes a random seat, and she ends up sitting next to one of the Crown Prince's cousins, Emery, and she's like, oh shit, I didn't mean to sit next to him. Oops. But the dinner starts and Ione is introduced. She's announced with Crown Prince Hoth as her, like, his betrothed. So she's actually using a maiden card while this announcement is happening. If you remember, the maiden card, you know, bestows upon you great beauty and makes you unblemished. And if you use it too long, you become cold-hearted. Ione was previously described to have like really pretty long golden hair, freckles, and like little like red marks. I'm assuming it was referring to like some acne spots and like scarring. I felt that. And also a gap in her teeth, and like it was mentioned that that's how she looked. So now that she has the maiden card, she's like no gap, no freckles, no red marks. Her hair is shiny and long and like more luscious, and like it just enhances beauty. And it's primarily, and by primarily I mean only, used by women to do this. There's only 8 of these cards, very highly sought after, especially given its effects. She's introduced as Hoth's betrothed, and this causes Elspeth to freak out. So she needs some air, and Emery follows her, and she's like, I just need air, I just need to go. And he's like really insistent on like being around her, like he's really pushy about it. I will mention he's 16, he's younger than Elspeth. Still, he's pushy about it, and he's drunk, and it's not cool. He ends up like brushing her hand at one point, like physically touching her in some way, and he kind of like eyes like roll to the back of his head, and all of a sudden he's like, you have something with yellow eyes trapped in your head, or some shit like that. And it freaks her out because he basically called her out for having the nightmare in her head. It's described that he has yellow eyes. We'll get to it. So she's really freaked out, trying to get away from him, and some guy comes up behind and just shoves him down the stairs. Not enough to kill him, still. It's a whole thing. Turns out that the guy is actually Emery's brother, his older brother, Raven Yu. And he is captain of the Destriers, and this freaks her out even more, and she kind of makes to like run away as fast as she can. But in him making sure that she's okay, she asks, like, how did you know that like I like needed help, that I needed to get away from your brother? And he was getting too like handsy and intense, and he said like, oh, my cousin informed me, because his cousin, being Elm, the other prince, Elm Rowan, was sitting next to Emery and watching him throughout the night. But Raven wasn't at the dinner, so it's not clear how he knew and found out, but it's weird, and Elspeth just wants to get away. We arrived the next morning, and basically all the women are like promenading in the garden, and Elspeth, because of her ability, sees a bunch of mating cards, which grosses her out because it reminds her of Ione, and she actually finds Ione, and they kind of like have it out again. And Ione's like, trust me to make my own decisions, essentially, again. And that's like where they kind of leave the fight. And Elspeth is like really upset by this, so she decides to like kind of veer off the path and go like deeper into the garden / forest and just kind of like freak out on her own. While she's out there, we see Raven, again, captain of the Destriers, very dangerous. And he's like, are you Elspeth? I need to talk to you. And she freaks out and asks again into her mind, help me. And so she has this great strength now, and she's running at super speed trying to get away from him. He does end up catching up to her. And I think at some point, like, they kind of like tussle, and she like accidentally like punches him or something, or maybe purposely, given the situation. But I knew we were in for a fun time when his reaction was fuck. Yeah, I knew we were in for a good one. When I read that, I was like, ooh, I didn't know we were going there. It's pretty much like one of the first swear words. I think like the first one was like shit, but like, Anyway, he knows something's up, because there's no way that little old Elspeth would be able to like knock out and outrun this dude. So he kind of takes her after, like, he's like, you need to be quiet, there are Destriers coming. And she's like, what are you gonna do to me? Are you gonna take me to the dungeons? He's like, I'm not gonna do that. So he like almost apprehends her, and he leads her into the castle, and she's terrified that he's gonna take her to the dungeons, which is where infected people go. But instead he takes her to a wine cellar and kind of talks to her and is like, you have magic. And she's like, can't really hide from this one. Yeah, what are you gonna do with me? I'll tell you, but you have to promise you're not gonna take me to the dungeons. And he's like, I promise I won't. They end up talking a little bit about it, and he says, I need to contact my family. And he pulls out a nightmare card and uses it in front of her. Mind you, there's only 2. And Tyrn, now the king, has one of them. And this is not, maybe it's just the same nightmare card though. Who knows? So his family ends up coming in, and they need to like make sure that she tells the truth. So his cousin, Prince Elm Rowan, among his, being Raven's father and mother, and sister, Jesper. So we have father, Fenrir, mother, Moret Yu, and sister, Jesper Yu. So they are all in the room along with Crown Prince Elm Rowan. And Elm's being an asshole, because he's an asshole when he wants to be super sarcastic, and like, I like him. Anyway, so he uses the scythe on Elspeth, and the scythe, if you'll recall, allows the user to take control of someone's actions. And he basically commands her almost, and the scythe's interesting because it's described as the person who is under its effects wants to do these things, like in some capacity. So she begins like slapping herself a couple times, and Raven's like, okay, that's enough. And he's like, what? I gotta make sure that she's not fighting the Scythe, because they need to make sure that she's telling the truth. And the other options also, they gave her options as far as it. So they could either command her using the Scythe, get the truth out of her using the Chalice, or subject to the Nightmare, which freaks her out enough, because if they go into her mind, they're going to find out that she has the Nightmare in her mind. So she chose the Scythe, and she was also encouraged to choose the Scythe. And the thing about it is they're kind of going to find out one way or another. Again, it's been a bit since I read this book, so I'm going to try and give you the Cliff Notes. Essentially, they question her. She tells the truth to some capacity. She reveals that she's able to see Providence cards. That's her magic. She got around the Scythe by kind of telling the truth. It's a half-truth. That's not her magic. That's the Nightmare's magic. Her magic is that she absorbs the cost of any card she touches. So whatever the Shepherd King paid for the cards, she absorbs into her. And for the Nightmare, he paid the price of his soul. So there you go. They find this out and they're like, ooh, we need you to work with us, essentially. We need you to be on our team. And she's like, well, what are y'all doing? And they're like, we're uniting the deck. What? They want to get it done by winter solstice. I believe it's summer equinox. Is that how that works? Because is it? No, that's summer solstice. Fuck, it's spring equinox. I'm sorry. It's spring equinox. So they need to unite the deck by winter solstice because Raven's brother, Emery, is infected with magic, and his degeneration is the cost of his mind. He's like going crazy, essentially. He's losing his mind. And they need to do this by solstice, winter solstice, if they want to cure him, because he'll probably die right after. Like, he doesn't have long. Oh, did I forget to mention? So on the topic of degeneration, we don't know what Elspeth is. We don't know what her degeneration is. It's unclear, but it's something to note. Also, uniting the deck causes not only the mist to be lifted, but magic to be cured, essentially. It's not clear how. So they need to cure magic and clear the mist by uniting the deck by solstice, or else Emery will die. And Elspeth's like, why isn't the king, like, what's up with that? He must know that Emery's infected, right? And they're like, yeah, he knows, but he kept Emery alive and around because he wants to use Emery's blood to unite the deck, and we can't let that happen. And so Elspeth's like, who do you have in mind to unite the deck then? Whose blood are you gonna use? You need someone who's infected. And they're like, don't worry about that, he's a bad dude. And so she's like, okay. So she has some time to think on it, but eventually she does agree to help them unite the deck, mostly because they kind of have leverage against her. But her ability to see cards is super important because it allows them to collect the deck easier. They're only missing a handful of cards. The king's closer to completing his still. It's revealed that Raven is actually in possession of the Nightmare card. So the second other Nightmare card, it's been under the king's nose this entire time. Spicy, I know. And by spicy, I mean drama. Drama, I know. They also like tested her abilities, like, can you see the colors, like the cards blindfolded? And she's like, yeah, I can. And so they test it out, and Elspeth notices that like some of the colors like disappear for a second and then appear, and she's like, how's he doing that? That's weird, but that's important to note. So they decide that the best course of action to keep Elspeth close and around and not in harm's way to get this mission done is to pretend that Raven and Elspeth are courting. And so she will live with them at Castle U. That's what it's called. It's a castle because noble people. She's pretty reluctant about this. Raven's pretty reluctant about this, but she does comment on how she thinks he's kind of handsome. It's cute. So, well, she comments that to herself, mind you, not to Raven. She ends up taking off with them when it's time, and she is now staying at Castle U. That is the excuse they needed to give her family in order to keep her around. It was just the easiest, most convenient way. Again, I'm kind of gonna rush through it because I don't remember this book super well. And given what happens in the second book, it's not that it's not important, it's just that the things in the second book are so much bigger than you can imagine. I'm gonna go ahead and give you as much Cliff's Notes as I can because I know this video is already gonna be long as fuck. So, they need to figure out where to find an Iron Gate. If you'll recall, that's the one that offers its users serenity, and if it's used too long, it steals years off of one's life. They also need the Well, which is the one that reveals one's enemies, and the Twin Alders card. All very important. They have the others in one way, shape, or form. Another thing to note, each Rowan holds a scythe. The scythe card that allows to control. It's only passed through the Rowan's family, so those cards are not like for the public. So the King has one, Hoth has one, and Elm has one. If you'll recall, there's a fourth, but no one knows where the fourth is, as far as like they have it somewhere. So, oh, the Queen, not around, by the way. She's not named. She died at some point earlier in, time, but she's not named and she's not spoken about really. So, there you go. But yes, they have all the cards in one way, shape, or form, and they just need a couple more, and especially when it comes to the Twin Alders card, the one card that has not been seen in centuries, they need to find it, and they need Elspeth's ability to be able to see cards. It's important. As far as how they knew to seek out Elspeth, Moirette Yu, Raven's mother, has a prophet card, and she saw a vision of Elspeth wandering the forest road with the 12 cards of the deck plus like 1/13 one trailing behind, and they knew that they needed her help, whoever she was, to unite the deck. And so that's how we find out that it was actually Rowan, Elm, and a couple other guys that were the highwaymen that accosted her at the beginning of the book and was, like, does your uncle have any cards? Like, they were after her because of the prophet card. So they saw the glimpse into the future. They saw Elspeth. They knew that they needed her some way, shape, or form. So yeah, they're highwaymen, and Elspeth's about to become one of them too. So they are now looking for an Iron Gate, as I had mentioned, and they have a lead of someone who has one, and they just need to find that out. So Moirette, Jesper, and Elspeth host some people over for tea who's like their, the man, the husband. He's not present, but they know that he holds a card. They just kind of need to know where he holds it, and they find out through this that he always has it on him. It's the most precious thing to him. Another important thing to note, Jesper is actually also a destrier. She's the only woman destrier, and she's not a girly girl. She's, trained to fight, and she's pretty I don't do dresses, I do pants kind of thing. She's based, love her. So yes, she's part of this plan as well. And once they find out that this nobleman always has the card on him, they know that they need to act fast because people are beginning to leave Stone after the equinox celebration, and they need to accost him as highwaymen on a road in order to get the card. So they kind of set off to do that, and it turns out that there is another carriage following with the Crown Prince Hoth. Mind you, Elm is part of the Highwaymen, like he's part of this. Elm's on our side. Let's call it our side. Elm's on our side. So a fight ensues. Not only is Hoth and some Destriers there, Elspeth's dad's there too. The retired captain of the Destriers. So this man can put up a fucking fight. After this fight, at some point, Jesper actually loses her charm. I don't think I've explained charms, so I'm going to go ahead and explain them now. Charms are essentially the one thing that keeps someone from being taken by the mist, if you will, because adults, when they enter, kind of lose their minds, and then children are infected. If you have a charm, you're safe, but it's still dangerous to Terry. So Jesper, in the scuffle at some point, loses her charm, and she kind of gets like sucked into the mist. All of a sudden she becomes like really euphoric, and she's like, I have to go into the mist, like they're calling for me. And essentially she's gonna die because the mist, it almost like clouds everything else and sort of makes you like enraptured with like, you forget your basic human needs, and your mind is consumed by what the mist wants you to be consumed with, which is just traveling farther into it. So Jesper's in trouble. Elspeth goes to get help, but she actually runs into Hoth, and they get into like a bad fight, and he's about to kill her. He's choking her, and he's going to strangle her. She's going to die. She asks for the Nightmare's help, and she like slashes him in the arm, and he actually ends up like breaking her wrist also, like her arm, her wrist, I think it's her wrist, in the fight to like, you know, save herself. A bit earlier in the fight, she also actually helps Elm, saves his life to get him away from her father, which he doesn't know because they're wearing masks, they're wearing all black, and they're like disguised. But also when the Nightmare takes over Elspeth's body, her eyes turn yellow. They glow yellow. Super important. So no one recognizes her, and if they see her, they're gonna be like, what the fuck? So her dad doesn't recognize her. Hoth shouldn't recognize her after their encounter. Still important regardless. They end up finding a spare charm to give to Jesper. It's actually Raven who has a spare charm, and the thing about it is when you're infected with magic, there's no need to have a charm. It's not important. The mist has already given you magic. It doesn't want you anymore. So there's no danger if you're already infected with magic and you're in the mist. Important to note. So we have now acquired the Iron Gate card. We are gonna fast forward some more. There is actually a point in where Elspeth is wandering Castle U, and she finds like some ruins of an even older castle, and like the only thing left standing is this room, and it doesn't have a door. It just has one window, one dark window, and it freaks her out sufficiently enough that she doesn't really want to go near it, even though the Nightmare is urging her to go into the room. Fun times. I think there's a festival happening in the square, and so they need to like show face and make sure like everything looks kind of normal. So Elspeth and Raven have to like attend it together and like, you know, look like they're courting, and there's some flirty vibes there. We also run into Dimia and Naya, who are drunk. 13, by the way, but okay, drunk off of wine, and they kind of like giggle at like Elspeth, like, ooh, you're with Raven. They're not the nicest stepsisters. They like kind of suck, but also like they're not the worst. It could be worse. During this, there is actually a whole thing that breaks out because there's a bunch of Destriers and Hoth that are around, and it's discovered that a little boy was infected and his parents didn't report him. So they're all gonna die now. The child is gonna be taken to the dungeons of stone and will eventually be executed. And the parents are forced, with Hoth's scythe, he forces them to remove their charms and walk into the mist. Horrible, awful, awful way to die. And so Elspeth kind of begs, like, Elm, because at this point she's walking around with Elm. And also he doesn't like her. He doesn't get good vibes from her. He's like super cautious around her. He's like, you're hiding something. Anyway, he is like, okay, fine, I'll do something. She's like, please, you are like the most powerful magic user I've ever met. Meaning he wields cards real well. So using his scythe, he has like a showdown with Hoth, and Elspeth is able to save the parents and also the child. It's heroic, she saved the day, but it's still pretty scary. Fast forwarding a bit, Elspeth and Raven are getting really close. They are like, you know, they shared some steamy moments and they're getting really close, and Elspeth, like, the secret of having the nightmare, like, is eating away at her. It's also important to note that she kind of feels like he's been growing stronger in her mind, like his presence is becoming more prominent. So she's scared because she's hidden the truth for so long and she doesn't want to lie to him anymore. She like really likes him, she cares about him a lot. And they actually end up sharing a super steamy moment, and they move it to the bedroom and they wham bam thank you ma'am. I will not go into detail. However, I will say one thing I really liked about this book is that regardless of like the steamy scenes, I didn't feel like I was taken out of the world. It was described in a way that like it didn't take me out of the book at all. It fit the entire tone, the cadence, if you will. It fit really well. It still fit with the atmosphere that was created, which I really appreciated because that has not always been my experience. And I really appreciated that. So we're gonna move forward a little bit more. Just wanted to throw that in there. There is some sort of event being held at the Spindles house. I can't remember what it is, but it calls for a bunch of people to be there. And like a bunch of people, bunch of noble people. I have no idea how big the house is, but like it grew in size in my mind when I read this because I couldn't fathom that many people like living in this house or like sleeping in this house. So they're essentially there also to suss out the well card because it's the last card they need besides the twin alders. And the only person that they know that has one is Eric Spindle, and it's the easiest target because that's Elspeth's dad. So that's the goal of this, is to steal the well card from her father. And they are worried about the fact that like he might have used it, so he knows to look out for them because the well card reveals your enemies to you. So it's gonna be tricky. But then Ione kind of comes up and she's like, hey, and she's acting weird. She's still using the maiden card and she's acting really weird, like cold and aloof and like not herself. And she's usually like warm and bright and bubbly and like, you know, that kind of thing. But she's acting like, So you know that she's been using the maiden card for long enough to feel its negative side effects, which is it making you cold-hearted. Keep that in mind. They are essentially, the group, the gang, is essentially like kind of socially forced to gather at like a dining table, and Hoth shows up and he's like, hey guys, we should play that game that we used to play when we were kids. And that's when they find out that the chalice has been used on the drinks that they have because they're kind of forced, like, come on, drink with us, share a drink with us. But they don't know until Hoth's like, all right, you guys have drank, now this is the game that we used to play when we were kids, you remember? Which is essentially they would drink with the chalice, meaning liquid truth serum, literally. And if you try and lie under the chalice's influence, you will be poisoned and you'll die. So you can't lie under a chalice because if you try to, you'll be poisoned, and like you physically can't lie. Like you cannot speak when you go to lie, if that makes sense. And everyone's like really upset and they're like, this is fucked up. And he's like, what? We used to play this when we were kids. And everyone's like, yeah, but that's when we were all like consenting to it and we're not this time, and that's really fucked up. And so he vaguely threatens all of them because he knows that there's something sus about them. And he also threatens Emery's life, Jesper and Raven's little brother. So they have to play along, and essentially everyone's asked very specific, daring questions. And it's woo. And it comes to Elspeth's turn to be asked questions, and Ione, first one up, she's like, are you in love with Raven? And she goes to try and lie, but she ends up saying like yes, and Elspeth's pissed because Ione took that from her. She took like her saying like I love you for the first time of her own volition, and the entire time like Raven's like, you don't have to answer, but she does, and she's pissed at Ione for that, which is fair. That would fucking suck. If that's like the first time you hear your partner like say that they loved you, or like the first time you're telling someone you love them, like it's not of your own will, that sucks. Anyway. Ooh. Big thing I forgot to mention. I'm so sorry. So at some point, I can't remember when, but it becomes clear that Raven is actually infected with magic. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. I completely forgot because it wasn't super relevant until right now. So, Raven's actually infected with magic. And yes, the king knows and the princes know. His magic is that Providence cards don't work on him. And he also can't use Providence cards, except for the mirror, which makes you invisible, and the nightmare, which lets you speak into people's minds, which are the only two that he can wield. And assumedly he can use the twin alders, but like it's lost, so who knows. But yes, his degeneration is that he can't use them. So every year he kind of like loses the ability to use one more. So now he's like kind of down to these two, potentially three. So his effects, like the chalice doesn't work on him. He plays the game like for fun. Anyway, because it doesn't work on him, he uses the nightmare card to speak into Elm's mind and try and coach him through the chalice. And like you basically have to like kind of like tell half the truth, and like he's trying to help. And he goes to do that with Elspeth, which she has explicitly told him not to. Like the conditions for working together were don't take me to the dungeons, don't harm my family, and don't use the nightmare card on me. Why? Because the nightmare's in her head and he'll find out. So he goes to kind of coach her through the chalice, and he uses the nightmare card on her, and the nightmare said like, she said get out, and like, you know, scares the fuck out of Raven. And it's bad because now he kind of knows that she's been hiding something, and he sort of knows what it is. So because she had tried to beat the chalice, she's poisoned because she tried not to say that she was in love with Raven. She's poisoned and she's like vomiting blood, I think, on the floor. It's a gruesome sight. Sorry for the lighting change. The sun's going down. I can't control the sun. I know. I thought it happened too, but no, not since my last video. I'm working on it though. So she's dying on the floor. She ends up waking up in her room at like her old room at Spindle House, which she used to live in the attic, like the most like tippy top floor. Damn, that sucks. So Raven's there and he's like, you gotta tell me what's going on. And she's like, okay, so this is actually my power, and my degeneration is that I'm like losing control over myself, like the nightmare's growing stronger. And he's kind of taking it all in. It's a lot to process, and he needs to go and do some destrier like watch rounds because the king ordered him to, and he's the captain of the destriers and it's his duty, and it's hot. So she's like currently being like watched over every so often. she was like resting downstairs at some point after like kissing Raven goodbye, so you know that they're on okay terms. And her uncle's like, oh, like you don't look so good. Are you still sick? Like we should like take you up to your room. Like it's totally fine. Come on. And there's something a little weird about it, her uncle being Tyrn. And it turns out that Tyrn ratted her out to Prince Hoth that she was infected with magic. And now he also knows that Raven likely knew, and they fucking hate each other. Hoth and Raven, I forgot to say that. Hoth and Raven fucking hate each other. And Elm fucking hates Hoth, and Hoth, I'm pretty sure, fucking hates Elm. Hoth used to, and we'll touch on it more in the next book, but like he didn't treat Elm well as kids, and Raven sort of like rescued Elm from that, and like he's much closer with the U's than he is with like his father and his brother. That is why he's part of this mission to like help Emery, because they're really close, and it's cute that they're close. So Hoth now has leverage against Raven because he's pretty sure that like he knew Elspeth was infected. So he brings one of the head physicians, I forgot to say. I'm forgetting so many things. I should have written a script, but I didn't. I'm sorry. So they are like the king's like people. The physicians, obviously. They are also adept at like figuring out whether or not people have magic, because the head physician, Orive Willow, it's all like Willows are like the physicians, it's like a family thing, I suppose. He also has magic. Orive Willow has magic. He is able to tell when someone is infected with magic. That is his magic. All right. So they were going to use his blood to unite the deck because he's a shitty person. He's infected with magic, but he like fucking like turns on essentially his own kind, people who are infected with magic, and like he's a fucking evil, sadistic hypocrite. He's not a good dude. So the U's plus Elm wanted to use his blood to unite the deck. But now Hoth is knocking on Elspeth's door, cornering her with Orive, testing her blood to see if she's infected. He confirms it, and a massive fight breaks out between the three. Elspeth's degeneration, which is her losing control over her own mind and almost giving control to the nightmare, is getting worse. And it's gotten to the point where it's not going to be long before Elspeth's probably gone. Like, gone. She also wants to unite the deck for her own like, she doesn't want this anymore. She's had him in her head for 11 years. Like, she doesn't even know who she is outside of him. It's not good. So she asks for his help in order to beat Hoth and Orive. And Elspeth, which is now the nightmare, really, kills Orive and maims Hoth horribly. And that's kind of where the book ends. Elspeth's gone, and now the nightmare has taken over. He's in control of Elspeth's body. I know I didn't really touch on the nightmare too much, but he's not a bad guy. He's just a monster, is what they call him. But he protects Elspeth when she needs it, and they may bicker a lot, but they both care for each other in their own way. He also has kept a lot of secrets, which may or may not come into play in book 2, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave this part here, and I will try and elaborate more the next time I pick up to film, but I have to go make dinner, so. Hello. So it's been a couple days since I last filmed. It wasn't intentional, but that's how it worked out. A couple things. In case you were wondering, my dinner turned out really good. So good, in fact, that I'm making it again tonight. And it's literally my new favorite dish, but I'm not telling you what it is. Second, if my ponytails are uneven, mind your business. Third, sorry I like slightly adjusted this, so I'm sorry if it's like bothering you that like all of a sudden it changed like frames just a little bit. Fourth, It's not that I didn't enjoy this duology, I just want so badly to be done with it so I can move on to other books because, sorry, I heard a noise. Because for some reason, I can't go and read my next book while this is still on my brain. It's like I have unfinished business with it, is what I was telling a friend of mine. So this might not be the most concise, and I might miss things, so I'm sorry, but it is what it is. I wish to get working on my next video idea for October, which I'm super excited about. Which I'm super excited about. So, without further ado, welcome to part 2. Ooh, that rhymed. Never sounded lamer in my fucking life. Anyway, we're moving on to Two Twisted Crowns, the second book in this duology. It is completed, worry not. Spoilers for Two Twisted Crowns. If you intended on, like, here's your warning. I don't know what I was gonna say there. This book is very different from the first one. I didn't mention it before, and I'll mention it now because it's important now. The first book was written in first person, and it was written from Elspeth's perspective, where, you know, in case you needed to know, first person is when someone says, like a character says, I woke up this morning, I did this, XYZ, right? And then we have third person, where it's Elspeth woke up, she did this, XYZ. Second person is rarer, but it happens, and it's where you know, the word you is instead of the character name or the word I. So like, you woke up this morning, you did something, XYZ, that kind of thing. So this book, book 2, we actually have multiple POVs this book, and it's interestingly done, and I think it's done well, and I enjoy it. So we have 3 perspectives. We have the perspective of Raven Yu, you'll remember him, our lead male love interest, and we have the perspective of Elm, which I really enjoyed. He definitely gets a way bigger spotlight this book, and spoiler alert, he's my favorite character. And our third perspective is with Elspeth, and she's the only one written in first person. Raven and Elm are both written in third person, so it kept its same thing from the first book. It was continued with the Elspeth first perspective. It was interesting. I liked it. So last we left off, the nightmare took over Elspeth's mind and mauled Hoth and the evil physician. What I did forget to mention though is that towards the end, everyone, including Elspeth because she didn't know, figured out through the riddles and everything that the nightmare is actually the Shepherd King who died 500 years ago. It was like foreshadowed super early on into the first book, and it was heavy-handed, so it was obvious to me at least, and so I wasn't like shocked at all when that reveal came way later into the book. I almost grew upset with it, like, Elspeth, come on. Like, the nightmare mostly spoke in riddles. It was part of his character. I didn't touch on that much. I didn't touch on the nightmare much, honestly, but it's because it's complicated and you'll understand here. So we pick up, it's a couple days later. Raven is in the dungeons. He's still masking as, you know, chief of the Destriers, like head of the Destriers, and it's obvious to the reader by this point that, like, it's not who he wants to be. He's obviously not anti-magic at all. He doesn't want to kill children. He doesn't want to kill family members, but he's had to, and we do get a little graphic with that in the book. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just letting you know that is mentioned. And consider it mentioned, because I'm not going to bring it up again. So Elspeth is not Elspeth anymore. The nightmare is Elspeth. So he kind of like took over, if you will. Elspeth's eyes are no longer like their usual brown-black. They're now yellow, like the Nightmare, which was whenever she borrowed power from the Nightmare, his eyes would like take over, and so she'd have yellow eyes. And so now that's permanent. He's speaking like the Shepherd King, and he's like, you know, talking in riddles. Like, he's not trying to act like Elspeth. And like, no one outside of the inner circle really understands what's going on. Mind you, like, Elspeth kept the Nightmare a secret for her entire life. No one knew. Not even her loved ones knew that she was infected with magic. She kept that secret as much as she could. So that's Elspeth now. I did mention that we do get Elspeth's perspective. So it's like not shown for a while because, you know, you want to be left guessing. But Elspeth is somewhere in her mind, and she doesn't remember her name. She like doesn't know if she remembers how to speak. It's really sad and graphic. We're gonna go ahead and continue. Hoth, like I said, last we left him, he was like on the brink of death because Elspeth / the Nightmare mauled him. That's why Elspeth / the Nightmare / the Shepherd King is in the dungeons. Also, I will be referring to them as separate entities. I'm just saying / so you get the feel for it. But when I refer to the Nightmare, I refer to the Shepherd King as well. Just so you know, there are other names, but we'll get there when we get there. So Hoth's like barely alive. He's in a coma, and if you didn't think he deserved it before, you will think that soon. Horrible man. Horrible man. Okay. He's in a coma. He's not responsive to the Nightmare card either, because the king is trying to use the Nightmare card on him to speak into his mind to see if like Hoth's like, knock knock, anyone home? Nothing. That's good news for us. Fuck him. Also because he knows more than he should, and he could get Elspeth killed very easily. The only reason she isn't dead is because she is the bargaining chip for completing the deck. The king has now been made aware of her abilities to see the color of cards, and so there is a small bit of negotiation of like, you can kill me after, like, you'll use my blood to unite the deck, I'll lead you to it, just like leave my family out of it, and like you can kill me, use my blood to unite the deck, I'll help you find the last card though and unite the deck. That's the bargain. It's a go. The king has Raven, Jesper, Elspeth, and then 2 other characters that were minor in the last book that I didn't mention because they were minor. They are sent to go and retrieve the Twin Alders card, the last card. And Raven begs for Elm to go with him. Like, let me take Elm. And the king is like, no. Because since Hoth is now maimed, and it is mentioned that Hoth, even if he were to survive this, he can't continue the bloodline. So Elm is now like the heir. So he can't just leave, especially because the king this is the last straw for Raven, and Raven's going to be either like killed, stripped of his title, or like banished in some sort of way after he goes to retrieve this card. So, not good. So Elm, this is the reason for having separate perspectives, because Elm is not going with them. Elm is gonna go on his own little journey, staying in the Walls of Stone. We're gonna jump over to Elm for a second. He is knocking on the Hawthorns' door, like, knock, 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 anyone home. The Hawthorns, if you'll remember, are Opal, Tyrn, Ione, and her brothers, and like also kind of sort of Elspeth. This is just a formality though, because he tried to make sure that they got away safely after everything went down, because they were going to be captured and killed if they didn't leave. So he went with another destrier who's like a snake. He couldn't really trust that destrier, so he kind of had to make a show of it. While he's searching the home, again, not expecting to find anything because he ordered them to leave. Like, he had people that they trusted go and like escort them somewhere, and he purposefully does not know where they went because that information could be used against him using a Providence card. Yeah, Ione pops up in the house. She's like in a dirty dress, she's barefoot, no coat. Mind you, it's like autumn and they're fucking shivering. So he's like, what the fuck are you doing here? And she's like, I came, like, where's my family? And noticeably, she's still under the effect of the maiden card. So something's going on. It's weird. She's acting really cold, but that's the maiden card. And she's just, it's strange. It's like a strange thing to encounter. So he needs to get her out of there before the other destrier, like, or two destriers, I don't know, see something, say something, basically. Elm goes ahead and uses his scythe to command them to like forget for a little bit, while he and Ione go like riding back to Stone. Again, she's like no shoes, no shirt, no service. Barefoot, coat, like coatless, that kind of thing. They're riding back to Stone and they get apprehended by highwaymen, and they know who Elm is, and so they're like, hands up, no. And so Ione, they're riding on the same horse and she's like riding in front of him. So like she reaches discreetly, I don't know how you do that, but slay, discreetly into his pocket to grab his scythe card to use it against these guys. And essentially like she commands them to kill themselves or like kill each other. There's like 3 of them. It's pretty like gruesome. And it's Ione who's doing this, and it's pretty like, what happened to you? We'll find out. Elm is pissed and scared because no one's allowed to touch his scythe card. We'll find out why. But it's like that's his, like, you can't touch it. Like, he doesn't trust anyone to touch it. It is like a huge thing for him. So she tries to bargain with him to like use the scythe card, and she's being weird about it, and he's like, no, sorry, no, you can't do that. Not even a couple minutes. Don't ever do that again, essentially. They ride back to Stone, and she like basically asks him like, you need to not get me put in the dungeon. You need to keep me safe. I don't remember what the exchange is for this. I couldn't tell you. But he tries his best to oblige. And there's a trial, if you will. And Ione, Tyrn, and Eric, if you'll remember, the brother-in-laws, technically Tyrn is Ione's father and Eric is Elspeth's father. They're all on trial for their crimes of knowing that Elspeth was infected. And Elm, during this trial, manages to discreetly use his scythe card to manipulate Tyrn. And by the way, they're all under the effect of a chalice. So if they speak a lie, they'll be poisoned and likely die. Again, with the rhyming, I'm just on a roll. The thing is, scythes can get around chalices in a way. So, like, the risk is he'll be poisoned and die, but Elm was willing to take that risk over risking Ione in doing that. So he forces Tyrn to basically, like, say some wild shit to, like, take the fall for Ione and whatever she could have or you know, couldn't know, whatever. So he gets into like a shitload of trouble, and there's like a fight that breaks out during this trial, and Elm uses his scythe, like, again, to command the entire room to freeze. During the fight, it was plunged into darkness and like people swinging at each other, not knowing who's who. Mind you, because he's been using the scythe so much and for like a while at this point during this trial, he's like in an insane amount of pain. He had described it as a piece of glass slicing through your brain, which paints a very good picture. And it also, I think, fits for the vibe of the card. So, not a good thing. He had seen in the struggle that Eric had accidentally like slashed Ione's hands and she was bleeding a lot, and it was like, whoa, what the hell? So everyone's kind of broken up. Ione doesn't get sent to the dungeons, but Eric and Tiern do. And they're tended to by one of, Elm is tended to by one of the Yu's allies, which is a physician. I didn't mention him before because he's not super important. And Elm says like, oh, make sure you tend to Ione. She had like a nasty cut on her hands. And he was like, no, she didn't. She's fine. And he's like, yes, I saw. Check again. And he's like, no, she's totally fine. I promise you. And he's like, where is she? Like, where is she staying? And he tells her. Elm goes to visit Ione. No cuts. That's strange. We find out that the reason Ione wanted to come back to Stone is because she needs something. The thing that she needs is her maiden card. She misplaced it and she wants it back so she can like not be like horrible and cold. Well, not horrible. She's not horrible. She's just like cold-hearted, can't feel anything a little like at times. She needs that in order to leave. Then she'll flee and like be safe, whatever. But like she needs the maiden card back and she doesn't know where it is. The A and B plot of this book is Elm and Ione trying to find her maiden card in Stone, and Raven, Nightmare / Elspeth, and a couple others going to find the Twin Elders card. That's the A and B plot of the book. The thing about it is, Elm gets a lot of page time because there's only so much you can do with Raven and Elspeth because their journey's so straightforward, I suppose, and there's a lot to be told about Elm and Ione. And Ione doesn't get a POV. It's just Elm POV for that side of the plot, but it's worth mentioning. So yes, a lot happens, and also like it's enough to like just kind of break down like that. So if I skip through things, it's because it's not exactly straightforward, but it's close enough. We'll go ahead and jump over to the more important plot, which is Raven Elspeth. Elspeth's still like kind of lost in her own mind, but she doesn't really know that. And we get very short chapters of Elspeth kind of like remembering things and also like begging to be let out so she can like, you know, see Raven because that's important. She's like trapped in her own mind. Well, not even just see Raven, it's just like she's trapped in her own mind. Like that's terrifying. And she wants to be able to see what is going on. Raven is basically, Raven and the Nightmare are leading this group deeper into the mist and the woods. We had talked about how people who have magic, are infected with magic, don't need to fear the mist because the mist already has a hold of them. The people who don't use charms, but it's still dangerous to stay in the mist. So for this particular purpose, they kind of gotta go in deep to like places that people haven't been in years. The Shepherd King, I believe I had mentioned, was born with magic. And the magic that he was born with was to be able to speak to trees. So yes, he actually shepherds trees. He talks to them and he's able to move them with his crook, which was in the room, the room with the one window from last book. That's also where his body is. That's where he's buried. It's sad. So he's able to move and speak to the trees to find their path to the Twin Elders and the Twin Elders card. So the Twin Elders are actual trees who are Man, they're fucking creepy as shit. So we go through, I'll go ahead and, I can't really figure out how to do this because it's not like the plots intertwine until way later in the book. Like, I'm talking like last like 30 pages, I think. I'll go ahead and focus on the less important plot for this, just to keep you hanging or something. I don't know. Figure that it's best to kind of end with the more important plot. So we're gonna jump back to Elm and Ione. Essentially, they spend about a week going through Stone, using different cards at their disposal to try and figure out, like, try and help her remember where her card is. And through this, we also get a couple steamy moments between the two. There is a little budding romance there. And we find out a lot about Elm and a lot about how Ione was treated during her stay at Stone, while Elspeth and Raven were on their mission in the last book and falling in love. So I had mentioned that Elm was my favorite character, and I'll go ahead and explain why. It turns out I've recently discovered my fictional type is broken and sexy. And because I imagine them in my heads, because I imagine them in my head, and like they're described on page, sure, but ultimately it's what's up here that counts. All they really gotta do is be broken, right? So guess what Elm is? That's right, you get a point. He's broken and sexy. So it's revealed, I think I had touched on it before, but Hoth abused him as a child. He forced him to hurt himself with his scythe, and that was a lot of his childhood, was him doing things against his will at the behest of Hoth and sometimes his father. Brutal and disturbing. And that is why he clings so tightly to his scythe, is because that was when he first was able to feel control, literally and figuratively. It was his protection against Hoth. He didn't get his scythe until his mother passed. It's not explained how or why she passed, but I believe Ione had asked, aren't there 4 scythes? And he's like, yeah, well, technically, but we've only ever had 3. And we just kind of lie and say that we have the 4th, but we don't know where the 4th is. So keep that tucked away. But yes, that is why he doesn't let anyone touch his scythe, because it's his only, it's his, safety net, not safety net, but it's his comfort blanket, if you will. It's, the only thing that makes him feel like he's in control. And, aside from Raven, it's the only way or thing that makes him feel safe. Because Raven protected Elm against Hoth when the Elm couldn't. And it's touching, and Elm is super upset that Raven is not there and he's not on the mission, but it can't be helped. So yes, we also find out that Ione didn't just lose her maiden card. If you'll remember, you lose control over a card that you're using if someone else touches it. So let's say I touch my Black Horse card 3 times. I got strength, and then someone comes along and taps it as I'm using it. Gone. It stops working because someone else touched it. So Hoth couldn't have hid her maiden card, because that would mean that it wouldn't work on her anymore. She wouldn't be affected by the maiden since he touched it. So he used his scythe to make her hide it and make her forget, and part of that was getting her extremely drunk the night of their betrothal, if you'll remember the equinox. He had said that he was doing this for her own good. It was better if she couldn't feel anything during their marriage. And it is 10 kinds of fucked up. For many reasons that we're not going to get into. I hope that you're all adults and you can understand why that is egregious, but there you go. I'm sure you can tell how I feel about it. So they try several cards over the course of, I believe, a week. And during this week, the King Corcus, that's a horrible name, but I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. King Rowan, still have beef with that name, is hosting a week of feast in Elm's honor to find his bride. It's like he has to marry by the end of it because Hoth can't continue the bloodline, and Elm's gotta continue it one way or another, and Elm doesn't want to, so this was the only way to force him. So, also during this time, the king signs over all of the important, like, heir shit to Elm. Like, you inherit the crown, you inherit, like, da-da-da-da. So everything's under his name now, if you will. It's official. Elm is the heir now, not Hoth. Hoth is still in a coma during this also, and along the things of, things being revealed. So another horrible thing that Hoth did to Ione is, if you'll remember the night of the party at Spindle House where they had the chalice drinking game where, you have to, like, anyone can ask you a question, you have to tell the truth because it's the chalice. After, like, a little bit later that night, Ione managed to, I can't quite remember, but knowing Hoth, she probably didn't do much or anything at all. He pushes her out of a very tall, high window, and she falls, and she snaps her neck, and she's laying there looking at the moon and dying. Except for the fact that she doesn't die. She actually heals. She heals completely, and she's fine physically, obviously not mentally, but that is why she was, like, kind of a mess when she was discovered by Elm at Hawthorne House, was because she didn't go back to Stone after that, obviously, because Hoth tried to fucking murder her. He pushed her out of a fucking window and left her to die and thought that she had died, so she was too afraid to go back, but she needs the Maiden card. So that is how it is discovered that the Maiden can actually heal you, like, completely heal you. If you'll recall the specific wording of the Maiden card, it bestows great beauty and unblemishedness. The wording was very intentional, and we, even in the last book that I didn't mention, we had a lot of tiny little, because the Nightmare likes to just speak in little riddles, used to in Elspeth's head, just to, he knows a lot, but she didn't quite pay attention all the time, I suppose, or try and figure it out. So he had said the Maiden, a very misunderstood card, because for 500 years, it's only ever been used for women to look pretty. And Ione even mentions, I'm sure if anyone else figured out its other use, they probably kept it a secret because it was the only way that the women could be protected in any form was, through the card, and it'd be exploited and taken away from them, or, they'll be purposefully hurt or killed if anyone found out. So it makes a lot of sense. But now that that is out in the open, Ione begs Elm not to use the Maiden card or a Maiden card on Hoth to heal him out of that coma and bring him back. He says, a living nightmare. And Elm is like, believe me, I'm upset that Elspeth didn't kill him, and didn't finish the job, essentially. He hates Hoth, rightfully so. He's a horrible, horrible man, and I've given you every excuse under the sun to hate this man. If you don't, look within. So, a lot of stuff going on here. A lot of trauma that they're digging up. And they're also definitely bonding as well. They have a lot of banter, they have a lot of chemistry, and it's never once a concern for either of them that, like, oh, are you gonna love me after the Maiden? Like, no. we're pretty sure he'll still be attracted to you. Like, I think his feelings go deeper than that. So I'm glad that that's not even brought up, is because, you know, like, it's good. That doesn't need to be a conversation. So we go through the week with that. They finally are able to figure it out by Elm slipping the nightmare card that his father has from Hoth's room and using it on Ione, but it took a lot of, you know, trust to be built, and consent, obviously, because that's important. And he goes into her mind and he has her remember that night, what she remembers, essentially. And she remembers this stone, and he's like, I know exactly where your card is. So they go to the throne room, and hidden in one of, like, behind one of the stones in one of the fireplaces in the throne room are a bunch of torture devices, namely like whips and maces and flails, I think. Sorry if you see my eyes going crazy, there's a gnat. Okay, what an inopportune time. And Ione asked, like, what are these things and why are they here? And Elm says, I didn't get it. And Elm says an education and punishment, which is something he had brought up a couple of times, which you understand what that means. I don't need to explicitly say that because it's incredibly disturbing. But luckily enough, Ione's maiden card is there inside of this little hole, and she doesn't immediately stop using it. She doesn't, you know, tap it 3 times to make it stop. Instead, they I still didn't get it. I don't think. Instead, they get a little frisky on the throne. And this is where Elm's master plan finally comes to the reader and Ione's attention. He, during the past like couple days, has been working to look over contracts and things. So when Ione and Hoth were betrothed, Corcus, because he was so drunk off his ass, because he always is, when he wrote up the contract, he didn't word it very carefully. So Ione is promised to the heir of the throne, the heir of Blunder, which is now Elm. So he asked her, like, do you want to be my queen? Because we can do this together. Like, we can rule together, we can be together and do this, but only if you want to. I understand if you don't want to be anywhere associated with the Rowan name after what you went through. And she's like, no, I'd like that. And she takes him up to her room and warns him that when the maiden lets go of her, she's going to feel everything that she couldn't feel these past couple of months. And it was going to be overwhelming and horrible. And sure enough, it is. She becomes overwhelmed with tears and is screaming and wailing for hours on end, and she eventually tells him to leave, and he takes it personally because, I mean, it's hard not to, I suppose. It's hard to read. The entire, any information given about Ione is hard to read. It's very dark and very graphic when it wants to be. Also, it is confirmed at this, like at some stage, that because Elm had asked, had he ever, and she said no, he never did, but he always made it clear that he could if he wanted to. So we have confirmation on that, I suppose. But to me, what he did to her was maybe the same, like about the same thing. That's my opinion though. So take that how you will. Form your own opinion. But once Ione finally crests the wave of emotions that the maiden card has unleashed unto her. She's quite excited for, the proposal of being with Elm finally, and ruling together and doing better, and not, all they want is to not have magic treated as treason, it shouldn't be punishable. And Ione doesn't want that because of Elspeth and how she feels about Elspeth. She's still close to her because the maiden just made her do mildly shitty things, But she doesn't want people who were infected with magic, who didn't ask to be infected with magic, children, to be persecuted. And Elm doesn't want that either because of his connection to Raven and Emery. So it's quite touching that it's what they both want. After that, we have a little jump scare of Hoth, all fine, because one of the Destriers, the biggest snitch of them all, was paying too much attention and noticed things, and so did Hoth. So the Destrier went ahead and used the Nightmare card on Hoth after he saw Elm give it back. I didn't explain it, but after he went into Ione's mind to find out where her maiden card was being hidden, he angrily stormed into Hoth's room and threw the Nightmare card down and was essentially fuck you. And so the Destrier, who was Hoth's bestie, was curious about that and decided to try and speak to Hoth using the Nightmare card. And Hoth just kept saying maiden, 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 because Hoth saw Ione and he knows that she should be dead. And the only explanation is the maiden card. So he put 3 and 4 together, and things are not looking good. So much was the peace, it only lasted a day for them. There's a feast held in the honor of Hoth and his recovery from his illness. They just phrase it as him being sick for a while. And he's using the maiden card all the time now because he knows what it can do. He's essentially invincible. But a little bit before that, he had to test to make sure that he was essentially invincible. So the Destrier, the one who is up Hoth's ass, took Elm's scythe card and commanded him to stay still, essentially. And Hoth had Ione be put under the maiden. He was controlling her with the scythe, and he took a dagger and he stabbed her in the heart all the way through. And she lay there dying for a long time until she finally started to heal, and all Elm could do was watch. And Hoth did that to make sure that the maiden can bring you back from anything. My feelings on that are obviously ones of disgust, and I don't feel the need to dwell on that. Let's continue. A feast is held in the honor of Hoth getting better, and Elm is still under the influence of the scythe. So is Ione. And she's also under the influence of the maiden as well. She's in control of the maiden, technically, and then Hoth has her under control of the scythe, and Destrier has Elm under the control of his scythe. Are you following? So Elm is commanded to then serve them wine, and by them I mean, the king, Hoth himself, Ione. They make a little toast, and the king starts doubling over and dying. So the wine was poisoned, or specifically his goblet, and since Hoth, in front of a massive audience, said, Elm, serve the wine. The crowd thinks that Elm poisoned the king, and with the king's fleeting strength, he manages to grab hold of the scythe cards, or he gives, because he has one of his own. Basically, Elm is no longer under the control of the scythe, and he manages to get his card back. He gets Ione out, and he uses his scythe to freeze everyone, just like he did during the trial. Freeze the entire room full of like hundreds of people, and they ride off trying to get to safety, trying to find where the fuck are like Raven, Jesper, and Elspeth. And they just need to get away from Stone now. They are fugitives for sure now, because the king is dead. Hoth is now going to take the throne, and Elm is labeled as a traitor, essentially. And the entire ride, the very long hour-and-a-half horseback ride where he has the entire room at Stone frozen, he's still commanding that, and so he is like in blinding amounts of pain from the scythe because of that. So much so that he passes out, and Ione and Elm like stop, and he's like not doing well, and he's like, you need to go and find your family. You need to go. I will hold them off for as long as I can. And she's like, you need to come with me. And he's like, no, I can't. Not, like, I will only put you in danger. You need to go. So she leaves. He waits as long as he can, and he lets go of the scythe, and Hoth and the Destriers come following pretty quickly after, and they find Elm, and Elm is taken into the dungeons. So we're gonna stop there with that plot. We're gonna move over to the A plot. Raven, Jesper, Elspeth, a couple of side characters. They have to complete a handful of like trials, if you will. They're not really trials, to reach where they need to go. One of them is to cross a lake, and everything comes with a price. Magic always comes with a price. If you know, you know. So they essentially, the party needs to cut their hands and offer blood to this lake in order to have safe passage. Well, you'd think. They're swimming through the lake, and there are monsters beneath the water, essentially like clawing at everyone's feet. One of the not important brother characters that I didn't mention, they're brothers, and they're like, they've been on the good team for like a while. They're just like not important. One of them gets like mauled under, and Raven like is able to save him, but like he's losing a lot of blood. It's very bad. And Elspeth / the Nightmare / the Shepherd King is like kind of zoned out like crazy. And we know that Elspeth is now able to see through the Nightmare's eyes like the Nightmare was able to see through hers. So he did warn her that it was going to be painful, not being in control of her own body. But it's what she wanted. So they're talking like they used to when Elspeth was in control. They're talking, and she's basically laying into him all the time. And the only way that Raven can speak to Elspeth is by using the Nightmare card and speaking to her that way. And it's really cute when not all the time like that can happen. So there's this ongoing bit where the Shepherd King will just randomly say like, Elspeth thinks you're stupid. It's so funny to me. It was like a very minor like reoccurring bit in the book, and I really enjoyed it. It was hilarious. And he only said that to like snap him out of like really intense emotional situations. So Elspeth and Shepherd King are arguing back and forth, and finally like everyone's like screaming at him, and so is Elspeth to like, can you help the dying man please? And then that's when he's like the maiden card, because they brought all the cards that they could with them, and so the dying brother uses the maiden card and is healed completely, and that's when this group finds out what the maiden card can do. Remember, the Shepherd King had said, like, oh, misunderstood card. Also, if it wasn't, I know I didn't explicitly mention it, but the Shepherd King made the cards. So you're talking to the 500-year dead man who made the cards. He knows them intimately. And remember, he also gave up something for each of the cards. So again, recall, Elspeth's magic is to absorb whatever the price he paid was. It's a little complicated, I know. So that's why he lived in her head, because she absorbed his soul, because that's her magic. And the degeneration of her magic was that she would slowly lose herself, and he would grow more present. He would like take over. Okay. That's why he's like the key to all of this. So it makes a lot of sense that Elspeth like couldn't physically be here for this, because the only way that this would work is if he were in control. I like to think that he intended for this to happen. He doesn't wish harm on Elspeth at all. It's actually revealed that like he thinks of her as a daughter, and he wanted to be the father that she never had. He wanted to protect her in ways that like no one else did. So, but the only way that this works at all is if he's in charge, and it's just easier that way because he has access to magic that she doesn't, and he knows things that she doesn't, and he needs to be in control. It's sad, but here we are. The Nightmare Shepherd King also goes to great lengths to physically alter Elspeth enough that Raven doesn't perceive her when he looks at her. Even though they use he, him pronouns because it's the nightmare, it is a little bit confusing. So he like cut off her hair. He doesn't like wash properly. He looks like a fucking dirty rat, essentially. But that's because he needed Raven to like not get so hung up on seeing Elspeth, but not her being there. He needed to have Raven differentiate the two. So it was actually kind of nice of him. And if there's one thing you need to know about the Nightmare, it's that he doesn't always go about it the right way, but his intentions are usually really good. So that's where we're at with that. They cross the lake, and the next thing that happens to this group is they are barraged with arrows, and so one of the other brothers dies. Is it the one that got mauled in the lake? Honestly, it doesn't matter. One of them dies. I know it sounds horrible, but it doesn't matter which one survives. So gets an arrow right through the head, insta death, and everyone else gets knocked out with this like gas. They wake up and they're in like this compound, and they're staring at these two women with like animal masks on, and it's revealed that this is one of the compounds where people who were running away from Blunder, running away from persecution, this is like their exile compound. And they know that Raven is the head of the Destriers, and they want him dead for it, because he drove them here or killed their family or killed children that were infected. Crimes, lots and lots of crimes. So, forgot to mention, the king also wanted to have one of the snitch Destriers join them on this journey. Forgot to mention that because it only is relevant now. So, that's what you need to know. I think at one point he runs away, and he also has the knowledge of the maiden card with this, so it's dangerous, but like they needed to let him go. I don't know. It doesn't matter because he's also here in the compound with them, and it turns out that these sisters who are wearing the masks are infected with magic, and they have really cool, unique magic that I think is super sick. So one of them can see through the eyes of birds, I think. Yeah, crows, I think, can see through the eyes of birds. So that's how they knew that they were coming. And the other sister can turn emotions or feelings into like alchemical gas, smoke. So that's how she knocked them out. I think it's super sick, super unique. That's what I really like about this series, is that the magic is so unique. Like, we don't just have like generic girl fire powers. If you know, you know. I'm not gonna, it's behind me. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, so the magic is like super unique in this world, and it drew me to it. It like really set the setting. Like, I felt every bit of this book. I felt fully immersed. It was excellent. So, to pay for their crimes, the alchemical sister, puts them under, and by them I mean the three Destriers, being Raven, Jesper, and other dude, under the influence of this murderous, angry gas. And they basically all see red, and they all like turn on each other. And it ends with Raven strangling the Destrier to death, very graphically. Takes a while. We're not gonna dwell on it. It fucks Raven up really bad, like really bad. He is noticeably like not okay after that. He is always described as having tremors now. It's bad. This book is dark. This series is dark, but this book in particular is like, anyway. Okay, so they are let out of the control of the gas, and Raven and Jesper try and prove their innocence, that like they have been trying to help everyone that they come across, or trying to, and he sent they have been sending people to these outposts that are like, there's a handful of them throughout Blunder in the Mist, so that they're not persecuted. And it is finally believed, because who comes out but the Hawthorns, namely Opal and her two sons, who made it to this compound, and like they're wearing charms so they're safe, but like they vouch for them essentially. So my one question is, because Opal like obviously noticed that like Elspeth isn't Elspeth, but she interacts a lot with Raven. Did she not just see him murder a man with his bare hands? Because it was described that like the entire compound was like circled around them, like cheering and watching. Did she not witness that? Because even if I knew, like I were her, even if I knew that he was under the influence of some like alchemical gas, and he was like essentially like clouded enough to murder someone with his bare hands, I still saw that happen. Like, I wouldn't be thrilled about him being with my niece. And also she doesn't react to, like, even if she did or didn't see that, that's not clear, but she also doesn't react to the fact that, like, this is what this compound does. Like, she doesn't even mention, like, anything about it. She's not like, oh my god, that was so disturbing. LOL. Like, nothing. They just speak like it doesn't happen. So that's crazy to me. I have a couple questions about that, obviously. Anyway, they exit the compound, and they're still on their trek. This book is really, really graphic and disturbing. I'm sure you know by now, but like, I just need to reiterate that. So the group gets to this like very thick area of the wood where like you can't even reach your hand into the trees, it's so thick. And the Shepherd King announces that like they're coming up on it. There needs to be a sacrifice in order to enter this part of the wood. And basically someone needs to take off their charm and submit to the mist. And since Elspeth can't do that, and Raven can't do that, it's kind of up to either Jesper or the one surviving brother. And they draw straws for it or flip a coin or something. And it ends up, Raven tries to lie and say that it's the brother who has to go do it, but Jesper's like, I know you well enough to know when you're lying. Like, for just one time in your life, you could have just said the truth, because that's a whole thing. So she takes off her charm, and she's immediately affected by the mist, and she's like almost euphoric, and she's like, this way, they're calling. And so the woods open up, and Jesper's running, and leading the way. So they have to run over a bunch of corpses and dead bodies, and it's like really graphic, and they're all rotting, and it's like to make it to the twin altars. We're gonna have a little pause so I can explain something to you real quick, because I may or may not have forgotten up until this point. All right, welcome to the third and final family tree that I have created for you. There is a reason I didn't mention it until now, until this book, but it's easiest to just explain all of this now. So, the third family tree, the Shepherd King's family tree. We have siblings, Taxus and Eris, which I'm choosing to pronounce that as Eris. Eris married Brutus, we'll get there. Taxus married Petra, and they had a bunch of kids, but the only ones that are important are Bennett and Tilly. So I know that Illic and Afton are twins, but Lenore and Fenley aren't, but I also didn't know their birth order, so I kind of like lumped them together as twins. I'm sorry. I also don't know who's younger. Again, like I said, the only important ones are Bennett and Tilly. So, why am I saying all these names to you? It is revealed throughout the book, which I haven't brought up now because it's crazy to just bring that up in little sprinkles when I'm explaining this all to you. Elspeth and the Shepherd King have gotten to a lot of talking while she's been trapped in his mind now. And it is revealed that his name is technically, it's a long name. His name is Emery, but like Amory Percival Taxus, I believe that's his full name. He goes by Taxus usually, but that's his last name, so that's important to note. And throughout, we get glimpses of his story. So you're finally able to know who the fuck the Shepherd King is. Essentially, he was, again, born with magic, and eventually he married and had a lot of kids, and he was very close to his sister, Eris, and she ended up marrying a man called Brutus, and his last name was Rowan. Now, we've been getting a lot of hints throughout these past two books that I haven't brought up of the Shepherd King / the Nightmare's distaste for the Rowans and calling them traitors, and it's because they are, because the Shepherd King is the Rowans are not the rightful bloodline, like they are not the rightful rulers of Blunder. What ended up happening was Taxus, that's what we're gonna call him, Taxus and Eris went into the wood where the party is currently at, trying to get to the Twin Alders, and Eris had to make the sacrifice because Taxus couldn't, and so she submitted to the mist, and she ended up dying for it in order for Taxus to be able to either speak to the spirit of the wood or speak to the Twin Alders or make the card or something of the like. But when he comes back, Brutus is incredibly upset because his wife's dead. And so we get a bit of dialogue between Elspeth and Taxus. That's another name to add to the list, by the way. Shepherd King, Nightmare, Taxus. There you go. I'm sorry, it's a lot. I know, I didn't choose it. It's giving Rumpelstiltskin. If you know, you know. So she asked him, so he broke your nose for killing his wife. And he said, and murdered me and my kids 3 months later. So, yeah. Brutus was so overcome with anger and grief that he murdered all of Taxus and Petra, that's his wife, murdered their kids, murdered Petra, and then finally murdered Taxus and assumed the throne. When Elspeth was also trapped on her mind beach, I'm just gonna call it that, she met his children, his memories of his children. And it's all really sad because he was not a present father because he made the cards. Like, as soon as he made the nightmare card, especially when he gave up his soul to make it, he like basically didn't feel anything anymore. It's like really fucked up, but he's haunted by the memories of his dead children, asking him like to play with them and like, when are you gonna be like able to come to dinner and shit like that. And it's like really sad. And they also had made a promise to see each other where the room is, the one dark window room. But the Shepherd King never came because he's been trapped in Elspeth's mind, technically. We also had a scene earlier in the book where Raven was actually talking to some of the ghost kids, and we find out that Bennett, the eldest, had powers. He had magic. And his magic was Raven's magic. He could not be affected by Providence cards. He couldn't use them. That was his degeneration as well. And Tilly, the youngest, her power was that she was able to touch people and heal them. And it's also revealed that Taxus made the maiden card for Tilly, essentially, because he saw how much it took out of her to heal someone. And she was slowly dying because of it. So that's where the maiden card comes from. It makes you beautiful and unblemished because that's what Tilly was to him. She was beautiful and she had the ability to heal. So that's why the maiden card has the ability to heal. Okay, we're a little more caught up now. So we get to the meeting with the twin alders, the trees, and it's a black and a white tree that are entwined, and they speak to, man, they're fucking creepy. Essentially, they finally let Raven and company through to go and speak to the spirit of the wood because they sacrificed Jesper, and through this, like, they have kind of, Jesper's dying because she's succumbing to the fever that comes with magic, where, you know, your veins turn black and you have a fever and you either die or the fever breaks and you have magic. So Raven is a broken man after all of this, as you can imagine, and he is on the ground, like cradling her, sobbing, trying to pry her free from the roots of the twin alders trees. And he's like, please, just don't take them. Don't, just anything but this. But he had said that he would pay any price to heal Emery, and this is the price. They're taken inside of this portal where it's this strange beach, essentially, to speak to the spirit of the wood. And when she emerges from the water, she holds out a card, and it's the twin alders card. And so Raven goes to take it, and she like snaps her fist shut, and she's like, mm-mm. And Nightmare Taxus is able to translate and basically said, she said you can use it, not that you can take it. And so he taps it 3 times, and as you know, the Twin Alders card allows you to communicate with the spirit of the wood. And if you use it too long, its side effects are unknown, right? Well, we know now because Taxus was able to reveal it to us. If you use the Twin Alders card too long, you lose all sense of time. Okay, so Raven is now able to telepathically communicate with the spirit of the wood, and she's able to transport him 500 years in the past and essentially show him what happened the night of Taxus and his family's death. And it shows specifically Bennett he was, you know, his uncle, Brutus, was using his scythe, and Bennett is able to snatch it and tear it in two. Again, Raven has Bennett's power. This is all very important. And, okay, the price of taking the Twin Alders card, because they need it to unite the deck by winter solstice, the price is for Raven to answer a question. What are you? That's what the Spirit of the Wood asks him. That is what he has to do. He has to answer correctly. He'll get the card. And he realizes that the answer is Taxus, because he realizes that the ruined castle where the room was, that was the Shepherd King's castle. He looks a lot like Bennett did. And Elspeth even commented it was looking at a mirror of like Raven younger, essentially. And yeah, so it turns out they are from, and I had put this together like a little bit before this reveal. They are from, the Yews are from the proper royal bloodline. And also, another thing to note, Brutus and Eris, it did not say that they had children. It is safe to assume that they didn't, because then this would be rife with incest. Because if you'll remember, Moret, a Rowan, married Fenrir, a Yew. That would be incest if Brutus and Eris had children. They didn't. It didn't explicitly mention that, but it would have mentioned it if it did happen, so safe to assume no incest. But yes, they are the proper royal bloodline, and Raven is technically the heir to the throne of Blunder. He's finally able to confront the Nightmare about it, and he's like, yeah, I knew. I knew when I saw that big nose of yours, essentially. And throughout the book, the Nightmare always calls him like stupid bird because his name's Raven. It's really funny. And then he says like, oh, you broke your beak, you stupid bird. Yes, they are descended from the bloodline. It's revealed that Bennett actually lived that night and he managed to escape and marry, and he changed their name, their last name, from Taxus to Yew, because Taxus is an old name for a yew tree. In the lore, and I think maybe in the real world, the alternative name to a yew tree is a Taxus tree. But yes, there you go. Whoa, are you excited? I'm still scared. Okay, so during this whole reveal, he answered properly, so he gets to have the card. And the Spirit of the Wood's like, oh, by the way, like, you better hurry. It's been a while. And that's when they're like, oh shit, it causes you to lose all sense of time since they're all in this realm. So they step out of the portal, and Jesper's kind of fine, by the way. I think, yeah, she was taken in the portal, a fever broke. She's kind of fine. Like, she's still not doing well, but like, she's alive. That's a good thing. And Taxus is able to calm down Raven by saying like, magic runs in bloodlines. That's why you have Bennett's powers. Like, Emery also has magic. There's no way that Jesper's going to die. Like, your bloodline can handle magic. So she's gonna live. But it is now a race to get back and unite the deck because it is snowing. It turns out through them, well, specifically Taxus speaking to the Twin Alders, they're like, how long have we been gone? And I believe they say 23 turns of the sun. They were in there for 23 days. It's been nearly, like, no, it's been a month since they left Stone. They need to unite the deck now because today is winter solstice and they see the sun rising. It is dawn of winter solstice. They need to fucking go. And so they have this massive like running through the woods basically the entire day, and they need to unite the deck. And that's when they find out, they run into Ione and the living brother, because Ione fled into the woods after Elm told her to go, and the living brother is like, yeah, y'all like didn't come back. And so I got worried, and then I found her, and like that's when they're caught up that Elm has been in the dungeons basically this entire time, the 23 days that they've been gone because of the treason, and they need to get him out, they need to unite the deck. So Hoth also knows the importance of this day, so they devise a plan. They go to the ruins of the castle, and they need to unite the deck there because it's just the best way to do it. The thing is, they're missing the Scythe card, and I think maybe like a couple others that are at Castle U, but they like don't have time. So to make this long and short, Hoth meets them there with Elm, Tyrn, and Eric as prisoners, and they're like the bargaining chips essentially. And he's like, let me unite the deck. And they're like, no way, no how. And it is a massive, and by massive, I mean like it's a battle between the Destriers and Hoth and our guys, our good guys. They end up winning just barely. Ione and Elm are able to take the cards, take Hoth into the room with the window, and they got this idea from Jesper, what happened to Jesper, because they were filled in. They decide to remove Hoth's charm, keeping him safe from the mist. The mist comes flooding in to infect Hoth, and since Hoth is now infected and they need infected blood to unite the deck, they spill his blood, they kill him over the deck of cards. The deck is united, but the thing is, there is a tussle in between between Hoth and Raven, and he like stabbed Raven like right in the side, and Raven's dying, and he can't use the cards, so he can't use the maiden to heal himself, so it's not looking good. We have, like Elspeth when, Nightmare, Taxis. Okay, Taxis is like, you guys handle the deck, I need to go find Raven, because they are given a moment to talk to each other using the Nightmare card. It's sweet, it's scary too. And so this was also the Nightmare's way of giving up the throne to Elm, because I think also during the whole conversation with the Spirit of the Wood, Taxis explicitly says he doesn't want to restore the throne with the U name. Blunder doesn't need a Rowan, and they don't need a U. They need Elm, because Elm is the only correct leader for this. That was the way that Taxis chose to hand the mantle over to Elm. And so the Nightmare is now using like fleeting strength to carry Raven into Castle U so he can like not die. Again, the deck's united during this point, and we wake up a couple days later from Raven's perspective, and guess what? The deck's united! So they needed to wait for Raven to wake up to do anything, but that was important. So Jesper comes in and heals him using her powers, because it wasn't safe to do so, I don't think, while he was still like comatose. And then Elspeth comes in, well, not Elspeth. And it's explained that, if you'll recall, the vision that Moret saw all the way back, think back, when, remember, Elspeth was apprehended on the forest road? Well, the vision that she saw of Elspeth and the 12 cards of the deck plus 1, so 13, following her, well, that 13th card is what came to be after the deck was united. The 13th card is created the Shepherd card, which, I'm gonna be so honest, made me tear up. Because like he really deserved that. Okay. And, oh, another thing to note, when Taxus, the Shepherd King, made the deck all those years ago, when he made the final card, the cost of it was that he wasn't ever able to use a Providence card. So he created the card to speak with the Spirit of the Wood, but he was never allowed to use them because that was the price, because every card came with a price. And here we are. That's why he couldn't fix it. That's why he couldn't fix what he did. So the Shepherd card is now a card that exists. And if you touch it 3 times, you will be cured of your magic. And there are no consequences to using it. And so it's like really fitting. So this is when Taxus and Raven have a conversation about it. And Taxus explains, oh my God, Taxus explains that Elspeth's magic is strange. And if she uses, technically, if she uses the Shepherd card, she will inherit every barter that was ever made for the cards. And she will likely die because of that. So she can't use it to cure herself. And Raven breaks down crying. And he said, I did all of this for her. Well, he did it for Emery, but he says, like, I did all of this for her and now I can't have her. And I also did start crying. I don't cry reading books. I just don't. I get sad, sure, but I don't cry. And I cried. That's saying something. And he said, well, Taxus says, well, there is one way. And he hands him the Nightmare card, the one that has taken over for Elspeth and, well, you know what I mean, the Nightmare card, the one that she touched 11 years ago. And he says, you can destroy it. That will free her. You can destroy it just like Bennett did, essentially. And so they walk out to the field where the ruins of the Taxus castle, the Shepherd King's castle, now we know, and the room are, so that Elspeth and the Nightmare can say goodbye. And that shit made me cry too, because all he ever wanted to do was protect her and be the father that she never really had. And it's very emotional. And because ripping up the Nightmare card would get rid of him. They can't speak anymore now. I mean, his soul would finally be at rest. He could be with his ghost children now, because ghosts exist, because remember the mirror card. But they won't be able to speak anymore. And so they have a very tearful, very beautiful goodbye. And Raven waits outside while they have this goodbye, and he kind of waits a certain amount of time before ripping the card, and Elspeth's back. And they can be together. And it's really cute. So we have a little flash forward. Elm is now king, and he doesn't go by Rowan anymore. He is king of the elms, because elm is a fucking tree, and he's king of the elms, and I love it so much because it shows that he's not going to follow in either lineage, and he's going to be his own king. And he writes an open letter with Ione to the kingdom, essentially saying that the Shepherd King is at stone for anyone to use if they want, but they don't have to. You will no longer be persecuted for having magic. You can have magic and it'll be fine, but if you want to get rid of your powers, you can, and there's no cost for it. It's open for anyone to use and get rid of their powers if they want. And he explicitly says that this is a new blunder, and he doesn't want to be like his father and his lineage before him. This is new, this is different. It's very beautiful. Also, if you'll remember, uniting the deck and all that also removes the mist, and so they can see the fucking sky now, and that's really cool. And so they're like, oh my god, the sky, and it's really nice. So we actually pick up at Hawthorne House at Elm and Ione's wedding. Yes, they get married. Also, Eric and Tiernan did survive the dungeon. Tiernan is at the back of the wedding house because not everyone forgives him for ratting out Elspeth to Hoth, which is fair. But yes, they get married, and it's really cute and sweet. And this is from the perspective of Elspeth also. But yes, now Elspeth and Raven are walking in the woods and having a conversation and talking about how much they love each other. They're just not ready to take that step yet, which is totally fine. But it's revealed that Raven actually didn't use the shepherd card. So Elspeth can't, and Raven doesn't want to. He doesn't want to get rid of his magic. So they're both like magic together, and it's really cute. And that's the end. So let's go into some closing thoughts. It's been long enough. I really liked this duology. I really liked it. I'd like to go back and read it now knowing what I know, because I feel like it's the type of thing that once you go back and read it, you're able to see things that you missed before, that kind of thing. So I really did enjoy this duology. It was so immersive, and it was just a beautiful world, and I loved the characters. They were very compelling, especially Elm. It was very unique, and I just really enjoyed it. There's a but coming. I have 2 glaring issues that I can't ignore. One of them, the least offensive of the 2, is the amount of spelling mistakes and errors in specifically the second book that I noticed. I counted 8, and that was on my casual reading. I wasn't looking for them, but there were 8 were the amount that I noticed spelling mistakes or grammatical errors. That's crazy for a book that made it to publishing and being dispersed, and you pay money for, oh shit, sorry. You pay money for this. That's not excusable. I struggle to place blame on the writer, Rachel Gillig, yes. Or the editors. I don't know who has the most hand in that, but I'm inclined to first and foremost the editors. That's your job, isn't it, to edit the book? I don't know, because this was, then I didn't really look into it, but this was published by a publishing house and produced and sold for money, and you're letting that many mistakes get through printing? That's just not excusable, in my opinion. That's not okay. It's pretty upsetting. And you might think that it's something minor, but it just is not professional for me. That's not, sorry, that bothers me a lot. Maybe more than it should. Be your own judge. The second issue, glaring issue, the more offensive of the 2, is the lack of diversity. It's a fantasy series. You could have very easily thrown diversity in there, but there isn't. I'm not going to go into detail. You can imagine there's no diversity, and it is bothersome because it is not hard to do when you're writing a fictional story. Can I please not? I'm allowed to like the series and also have issues with it as well. So this is one of those things. I like the series, but that is a big issue for me. And that is why I gave it the rating that I did on Storygraph. Speaking of, I keep forgetting to link that in the description. So if you care to check out my Storygraph, I'll link it this time. You can find me on there. You can see what I rated it. I don't fucking remember. It was a while ago. So that was just something I couldn't look past. Those were 2 things that I couldn't look past, but mainly that second one, the latter, because it's just not excusable to me. There needs to be diversity. It's very important. Need I say more? I'm not going to. This is one of those, you'll notice this with me. I don't always feel the need to elaborate because we're all adults here. You can infer. You can put 2 and 2 together. I don't need to elaborate on these kinds of things. Okay. Now that we have that out of the way, let's all take a breath because this was a long video. Okay, inhale, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thanks for doing that with me. Also, thank you for watching. I know this is going to be a long one. I don't know how long yet, but I tried to make this short and concise, and I've been filming for 1 hour and 34 minutes. So here we are. As always, please, I encourage you to form your own opinions. If you think that this series is something that would interest you, read it, form your own opinions, have your, feel your own feelings. That's super important. Don't take my word as law, my opinions, my feelings, all that. They're my own. Have your own feelings about this. I'm curious to know if you do end up reading it, how you like it and what your thoughts are on it. Because I think everyone having their own opinions is helpful. And it's a good thing. So, okay, you'll probably see me in October. Fingers crossed. I feel like I'm about to see you in December or some shit. Not purposefully, but I think that's all. So yeah, thank you for coming with me on this this long journey of talking about One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns. I hope you have a good morning, evening, noon, night. I said that out of order. And thanks again. Bye.